to talk about up until then. For more on the week in politics, we're joined in the studio by the Shadow Assistant Minister for Infrastructure, Pat Conroy, and also Liberal MP Craig Kelly. Thank you both for joining us this morning. Craig, let's start with the reports in News Corp papers this morning about this energy announcement from the government.
Yes.
Just take us through the details of that.
Well, pretty much we're trying to put a default offer in there as standard. What we've seen the electricity companies pushing the price up and then offering people a discount. People not on that discount have been paying far too high a price. So we've got a determination to get electricity prices down. That's what we're working on. In contrast, we've also seen in the Australian this week the report that says from Brian Fisher, Labor's policy is going to push up the wholesale price of electricity another 58%.
But your policy here, is this stepping on the state's toes a bit?
Look, we have to work closely with the states. Remember, electricity was originally entirely a state's issue. With many issues that happened over the last several years, federal government's got involved. So yes, it's important that we have a close working relationship with all the states in this.
Craig, the Chief Executive of the Australian Energy Council, she says, look, the real problem with electricity prices in Australia is not so much the stuff that you guys are trying to address now, but the fact that there is no coherent energy policy whatsoever, and that the NEG would have given some certainty to the industry. All of the other ways that we've tried to address climate change would have given some certainty to the industry, and until there is that certainty, those cost pressures are not going to be alleviated. Is this a cheap shot before the election to try to desperately convince people that you guys are responsible on energy prices?
It sounds like it. We hear this certainty, no certainty. Remember, we've got record spending at the moment on renewables. There has never been more spending on renewables at the moment.
Yeah, but nobody's building anything new because they don't know what the price on coal is going to be.
Well, this is the problem. There's no baseload generation being constructed. You're exactly right, because people look at the future and they see Labor promising 45% emissions reduction target. Under that, your coal-fired power stations have to close and your electricity prices go up. That's why we are.
But are you saying that they should believe that Labor will never enter government again, and that there will never be Australia will never have a policy on climate?
No, we have these policies at the moment. There's a renewable energy target. This year there's $2 billion worth of subsidies going to rooftop solar. $2 billion. They're the policies at the moment. Now, where we're falling down, we don't have enough baseload power in the system because of the uncertainty and threats of the risks of Labor's reckless emissions target.
All right, we might bring Pat Conroy in. Pat, if this does bring down prices like the government says it will that be a threat to Labor in the upcoming election?
Not at all, and we announced this exact policy 6 months ago, so good to see the government catching up with us 6 months too late. Should point out that the vast majority of people are on discounted offers, so this only applies to customers on a standing offer. So it will help some customers, but not the vast majority of electricity consumers. But the key issue, as the Australian Energy Council identified, is this government has had 11 energy policies in 2.5 years' time. 2.5 years. That is ridiculous. 11 policies in 2.5 years. They abandoned the National Energy Guarantee, which their own modelling said would reduce power prices by $550. Instead, the government's own figures say power prices will go up by $300 because of abandonment of the NEG. What is essentially is that we have a coherent energy policy that cuts emissions, that drives investment into the energy sector and improves reliability. We've got that policy, and Reputex modelling has said that our policy of 50% renewable energy by 2030 will reduce power prices by 25% compared to where they would be otherwise.
Pat, Craig's just made the point that the real problem here is that the industry has no idea what the policy is going to be in the future, and that they're afraid that if the Labor Party gets into power, that coal and affordable and other affordable but dirty forms of energy will become unsustainable in Australia, and we won't be able to use it, and that will put even further upward pressure on prices.
Well, industry has been burnt by the fact that they've faced 11 energy policies in 2.5 years. We've been very clear what our policies are, and we're in a lucky situation that we've got a lot of coal-fired power stations that will close soon due to their age, nothing else. And the Australian Energy Market Operator have said that the cheapest and most reliable replacement will be renewable energy backed up with pumped hydro, batteries and gas. So Labor's policy of 50% renewable energy will not only replace that ageing power stations with reliable power, but it'll be cleaner and cheaper. And that's a policy I'm really proud of.
How do you get there? How do you get to 50%?
Well, it's quite easy. We're already at 23% at the moment thanks to Labor's renewable energy target. And so getting to 50% by 2030 is quite achievable. In fact, the Australian Energy Market Operator has already modelled a scenario of getting to 50% renewable energy by 2030. And as I said, Reputex said it'll be 25% cheaper than what the government is proposing. It's practical. You just need a coherent plan instead of this government's changing policy every second day.
Right, I want to move on to another topic that has dominated this week, questions about the Hello World travel contract. That's the travel agency that has the whole of government travel contract. There are a lot of questions about this contract and the relationships with various ministers and Joe Hockey, the ambassador. Is it time, as Labor has called, to have some sort of inquiry or investigation into these relationships around Hello World?
It seems, as Pat said, Labor's had a disastrous 2 weeks. Absolute disastrous 2 weeks. So when in trouble, go to the bottom of the mud bucket and throw the mud and see how much you can throw rather than discuss policies. This story is a complete beat up. We're talking about whether Joe Hockey organised a meeting with someone to try and reduce their travel costs.
No, it was in regards to the Chief Executive, Andrew Burns, saying that Joe Hockey owes me.
And that has been denied. But let's just say, even though it's done, let's just say it's true. It's involved organising a meeting. It's not giving any special favours or any special advantage. It's simply organising a meeting.
OK, well, what about Matthias Cormann, the minister, not being charged for particular flights and not noticing that happened? Well, I mean, the non-charging, that should surely raise enough questions.
I think most people that look at their credit card bill, you go through it and you look at for charges that you don't recognise. You see odd charges, you don't go through and tick off everything you've paid, and it's quite obvious and explainable what's happened there. But this is, as I said...
But hang on, when you're taking the international flight that you didn't pay for, you're aware that you didn't pay for it?
Well, no, I'm sure that when you get your credit card bill, that I know when I do, or your whatever your card bill is, you go through and you look through the bill, and what you're looking for...
Yes, you're right. That
you're looking for expenditure. You're looking for expenditure. Hang on, I don't recognise that. You think, oh, that's right, yeah, I did do that, or I did pay that grocery bill.
But Craig, at the point, it depends. If I'm at home and I'm looking through my credit card bill, you're right that I wouldn't notice something that isn't there. But if I was sitting in a business class seat on an aeroplane going overseas, and that was when I was looking at my credit card bill, I'd be perfectly well aware that that flight wasn't on it.
Well, that's not what happened. You go back. You don't get your credit card bill when you're flying overseas. You look through it, and you see you're looking for charges that are not there. But again, this is a complete distraction. We had reports out today that Labor's policy this week, extra $9,000 cut to average wages.
Rubbish.
That's that's.
So hang on, just before we change the subject, are you saying that all of the allegations, because there are a number of things, right? There's the Michaelia Cash concern. There's the concern about Joe Hockey apparently owning $1 million worth of shares in this travel company that he then took a meeting with because they were owed a favour ostensibly. There are a number of allegations, and there's a comparison that's made in the Fairfax Press today to, for example, what the corruption standards were like in the 1980s. When a minister accidentally didn't declare a Paddington bear when entering Australia, and then resigned, and then stepped aside and resigned because they were the most tiny infraction in comparison to things that seem de rigueur at the moment in the government. Yeah. And you're saying that we just have to pay no attention to it because we should be talking about policy.
Of course, I have a chance to look at these things, but when you look at them, there's actually no allegations of corruption whatsoever. There's no allegations that this contract was somehow awarded improperly or it was overpaid. None whatsoever. It's on the peripheral. It's just typical what we see from Labor. They know they are losing the political debate, so they go straight to the mud bucket and throw the mud.
Can I respond? Because this whole episode stinks. It stinks on multiple levels. First off, if I've booked a flight and I'm looking at my credit card bill, I know that I've got a $3,000 bill coming, and why isn't it on this statement versus the next statement? But the real issue here is, first off, the Foreign Affairs Minister abolishes the travel panel, which meant that there was multiple travel options for government. Instead, a $1 billion contract is offered to Hello World, a company owned by the Liberal Party Treasurer. Subsequently to this, Matthias Cormann receives a free flight that he doesn't notice and only pays for when journalists draw it to his attention. Then we have the ambassador to the United States, Joe Hockey, not telling embassy officials he's got $1 million of shares in a travel company when he asks them to set up a meeting. Then DFAT officials don't know about his shares until after the meeting has occurred. DFAT officials aren't aware of any other subsequent issues with that meeting. This is incredibly murky. It stinks. This is a government that's just interested in looking after its mates. You just have to look on Friday. They appointed 14 ex-Liberal MPs and staffers to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. This is a Liberal Party. This is a government for the donors, by the donors, from the donors. And The Australian people just think it's incredible that someone could forget about a free travel, could forget to mention $1 million worth of shares.
So is Labor still wanting or calling for a federal sort of version of the ICAC?
Well, we committed to a National Integrity Commission last year, and we've said quite clearly that this entire saga should be investigated by a National Integrity Commission, and this government should commit to the Integrity Commission, because when these things occur, people's trust in the democracy falls.
Why not have that, Pat? Craig?
Well,
sorry?
we are working through a model. We agree that there should be some type of National Integrity Commission. We have to look at we certainly don't want the model they've had here in New South Wales, because we've seen many innocent people have their careers absolutely ruined on false allegations.
Your model is
Now,
a toothless tiger.
and that's what we don't want to have. And these methods, whatever they are, they're all investigated. But again, it's Pat going to the mud bucket, throwing the mud because they don't want to discuss
Mate,
the basics of what's happening in this economy.
If you visit your electorate and talk to people on the streets, I guarantee
They are concerned about their electricity prices.
They're
That's what they are
insulted
concerned about.
that
They're
your
concerned about their
ministers
job.
are so out of
That's what
touch
they are
that
concerned
they would
about.
forget about a
They are worried
$3,000
about the property
flight.
values,
They
your
are-
negative gearing
They are
is going to
insulted
cut.
that
That's
the
what they are
ambassador
worried about.
would forget to mention $1 million worth of shares.
Pat, your party, as Craig pointed out, has not had a great couple of weeks. It thought it was going into an election in which it would have the upper hand, and it seems like it's been thrown a bit of a curveball by the whole question of the Medivac bill and now questions of economic management under Labor and the Banking Royal Commission. Is this a way for you to just divert the conversation so that we're talking about how nasty and corrupt the coalition is, instead of actually focusing on Labor's policy failings?
Well, I reject the premise of your question that we've had a bad couple of weeks. On the Banking Royal Commission, for example, we've announced a commitment to 75 of the 76 recommendations. We've outlined how we'll
Which
meet
is different to what you did say, which
Yeah,
you
you've
initially
dropped
said
one of the
that
recommendations.
you'd reduce all of them.
We've actually consulted with industry, and we've solved the mortgage broking
So were you
issue.
premature in committing to all of them?
No,
before
we
you'd seen
weren't.
the
We
recommendations?
consulted with industry. We said in principle we'll follow all those recommendations, and we've hit 75 directly by the Royal Commission's recommendations. The other one we're attacking through a different way. By contrast, the government's only committed to 60 of the 75 recommendations. The other 15, they're either going slow, they're dropped off completely. So,
But if it's okay to drop one, why isn't it okay to
No,
drop
because
15?
we've
You have to
tackled
do
it-
it on a case-by-case
No,
basis.
because the other one we've tackled in a different way. The mortgage broking industry, just like Commissioner Haynes said, there are competition issues if you adopt the recommendation immediately. We've consulted with industry and consumer groups, and we found another way of ending the conflict of conduct between the banks and the consumers through mortgage brokers. We've solved it another way. By contrast, we've got a government that voted against the Royal Commission 26 times, Prime Minister that called it a populist whinge, and will only implement 60 of the 75 recommendations.
I think Pat's explaining a backfill with a double pipe there.
Oh, please.
It's a complete
You
backfill
guys have
on
no
Labor's
credibility on this. You've run a protection racket for the banks for
Pat,
the
come on.
last 6 years, and you should be ashamed of
Well,
yourself.
Craig, Labor is vowing to expand the compensation schemes for victims of banking misconduct. Theirs is 4 times more compensation than the Coalition. Would the Coalition look at increasing theirs?
Well, I think we could, but remember there's also the tribunals that we're sort of setting up so these cases can be heard. So where there is wrongdoing, that these people can actually get the due and just compensation that they deserve. One thing we've done is there's a statute of limitations on many of these types of conduct to 6 years. We've extended that to 10 years. So going back 10 years, people will be able to get compensation.
But on that recommendation, for example, the government has compensation being paid by taxpayers instead of banks. We've said banks should pay for the compensation because they did the wrongdoing in the first place, and that really symbolises this government's commitment to helping the banks over taxpayers.
Okay, unfortunately, we've run out of time. Pat and Craig, thanks for coming in this morning.
Thank you.